All right, this meeting is now in order. Agenda item 2.1, review of budget recap and timeline. Mr. Guidry?
Yes, this is our May 10th meeting. We have one meeting scheduled for the 15th of May, next Tuesday, where we're planning on bringing back all of the budgets and requesting that the board make a motion and approve our proceeding through the adoption process, which would take place towards the end of May, where we have our public advertisements, public inspection periods, followed by a public hearing on June 13th at 4 p.m. And that public hearing will be followed by a special board meeting at 4:30 to adopt the budget. And that's our that's where we are in our budget recap and timeline.
Thank you. This was a procedural item. We'll move on to item 2.2, Group Insurance Fund proposed budget.
There have been no changes to the proposed budget that was presented at our prior meeting. This is basically a continuation of discussion from the prior meeting, so that's why we are presenting it. So since there are no changes, at this point I'd ask if there are any questions.
Are there any questions from the public on this? Well, rather, this is a action item, and they're recommending that the board provide recommendations to administration with regards to adjustments to be considered for the group insurance fund budget during the 2018-19 budget process. Do we have a motion? I have a motion. Well, this is an action item. Yes. Mr. Broussard, we have a motion by Mr. Lachele and a second by Mr. Elroy to approve as is. Any public comment? Board member comment? Mr. Santani?
Mr. Guidry, is that the appropriate wording? I want to make sure we get this right so that you have the direction. I assume we mean proceed with the advertisement for this budget so it will not come back to us at the next budget meeting. This is what we're doing. And so this is the appropriate wording for that?
Well, at this time it would be to proceed with the budget recap and timeline as presented, and then we come back next Tuesday.
No, we're on the group insurance fund.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so his motion, I believe what Mr. Lachele is intending is to have this budget proceed to the adoption process. We want to make sure that you have the appropriate wording of the motion so that it does that.
Well, we're going to come back with all of them on Tuesday, all at one time. So just for tracking purposes and things of that nature. At this point, if there are no questions, we would just...
So these are listed as action items. So are you asking for action tonight?
The action would be if there were any changes.
All right. You want to pull that? All right. Item 2.3, preliminary report 2018-19 general fund budget summary, projected revenues and expenditures.
Here we have 6 sections that we had reviewed at the previous meeting. There have been no changes since the previous meeting to the first section, which is fund balance. There have been no changes to revenues, which is the second section. The changes that have come about since the last meeting are first reflected in the third section, amounts to be allocated to cost centers in schools. I would ask Ms. Richard if she could point out the proposed, let's see, 417-18 special board meeting adjustments column. If you'll notice on the schedule, it's the fourth column from the right. There is a column entitled 417-18 special board meeting adjustments. These are the adjustments that were approved by the board during our last meeting. The next column is the proposed adjustments, proposed budget after these adjustments. And that's really our starting point for this meeting. So I just wanted to explain the format of the schedule. The next column, entitled administrative adjustments, are changes that administration has made since the 417 meeting. And that is where I'd like to start. and I will review only those line items that have changed, and if a board member would like to bring up any of the other line items, of course they should feel free to do so. So with regards to the amounts to be allocated to cost
Mr.
centers,
Guidry,
yes,
I'm
sir.
sorry if I can interrupt.
Just for clarity for people following at home, the third column from the right, proposed adjusted 4/17/18 special board meeting, that should read 510, right? Or is it? I mean, is that what's coming out of the 4/17 meeting?
Yes.
Okay, thank you
Yes.
very much.
Okay, so the first line item that we have an administrative adjustment is staffing appeals. You'll notice a slight reduction. I believe we went from 18 to 14. And these adjustments were basically to offset some of the adjustments that were made during the 4/17 meeting. A little further down, and is the row number showing? No, the item number's not showing. Okay. Okay, the next line item is adjustment to approved staffing ratios, assistant principals. What we did there was initially we had the end result netted, whereby we have now separately stated the adjustment to the board-approved staffing ratio. You'll notice the $540,000 decrease there. And then the next line items are appeals for $630,000. So in essence, the 540 removes the appeals from last year, from the current year, and the 630 puts in the appeals for the 18-19 year, which basically nets out to one additional appeal. So I just wanted to make mention of that. Previously, it zeroed out because we had basically retained the same number of appeals as last year. Since our last meeting, our number of appeals has increased by one. With regards to custodians,
Mr. Guidry.
Yes.
So at the prior meeting, it was listed as no change, and so why did we the adjust to approved staffing ratio for assistant principals? So why did we go ahead and do this instead of just adding an additional something to the appeals line item?
Because we wanted to, typically we show a line item that adjusts to the board approved staffing, and then anything over and above that we show as a separate line item. So for the last meeting we had netted the two, and when we were reviewing it we noted that, and we said, well, let's do the way we typically present it, where we adjust to the board approved staffing ratio, and then we show the appeals. That way the board can easily see what's being added, if anything.
Okay, thank you.
Next line item is the adjustment to staffing ratio for custodians. We had half a position in reviewing the information that needed to be added. We have a reconciliation to position control. You'll notice an increase there that brings us to $652,500. Basically, that reconciliation, we compared every location, every school site, every office site, from what we had identified in position control to what was actually running through payroll. And because basically position control is what prepares our budget for us. When we pull in the individuals that have a position control, a number assigned to them, that's what gets the process started, or those are the individuals whose salaries will be budgeted. So since it's the first time we're doing this, we went through a process to make sure that we had not left anyone out. If you don't assign a position control number to an employee, then they do not get brought into the budget. And in doing that, we completed the reconciliation process, and it required an additional adjustment. That's what this line item is. Itinerant teachers staffing, that is a adjustment to ratio as well, at 536. We had not looked at the itinerant staffing in time for the last meeting. We have done so since, so that's why we're making that adjustment now. MP Moss staffing, same there. We had not yet looked at the MP Moss staffing at the last meeting. We have now done so. Same with world language immersion, ESL staffing, and pre-K staffing. So those are adjustments that we have made as a result of looking at the staffing ratios and adjusting accordingly. Any questions up to this point? I'm going to move to the next adjustment line item, which is the safety initiative contingency. 417 meeting, we're at $1,200,000. We were able to keep it at $1 million. In our the slight reduction is due to our balancing the budget from the 417 meeting. School district's contingency, we decreased that by $100,000. Reclassifications, we've eliminated that line item. Increased library allocation. Initially, we had asked to increase from 750 to 10. We're now asking to increase from 750 to 9. The transportation for minor sports, we have eliminated that. Robotics program, we have eliminated this particular line item to increase additional materials. MP Moss new elementary site, $40,000. That was one that was eliminated completely at the last meeting, 417 meeting, and we took it that the issue was possibly the theme. So we wanted to allow the school have what we need to open the school, but allow us time to come back to the board with options for them to look at and consider. So that's why you see the $40,000, which is considerably less than the, what we had originally placed in there of $350. Cost center supervisors, additional increases, no change there. We had, and then we went through the cost centers again. So this is what we're going to be seeing: additional cuts, public relations, a reduction of $15,000. I'm going to flip to the next cost center and just go through them rather quickly. Addition of one pre-K section of Myrtle, we have eliminated that line item, as well as the $125,000 that was included in the line item immediately following, because we're going to take care of that additional section by moving a section from Plantation. So there would not be a need to cover those costs. It's just a transfer of the section from one to another. While we were looking at the transportation diesel costs, we had a request to increase our budget to finish the year. If you remember, during this year we had all of the rerouting, and then after the rerouting we had several offsets that went against the transportation savings. So now that the dust has settled, in essence, we needed some funding to allow us to finish the school year. Some of that's due to, if you notice at the pumps, the diesel fuel and that we use for our buses, as well as unleaded, is on its way up. So that's what we're seeing there. And I'm just going to go through the changes, I guess, in groups. We'll go to the next one, next change, and you will see Leader and Me, reduction of $66,000. That removes the cost that's being funded by the general fund, and we have identified Title I as being the funding source for that particular program. The remainder, you can see various cuts in the cost centers that are identified. So if you would take a look at the next 10 or so items, if you have any questions, they're not material in amount, but in total, they assisted us. They were important to us because they assisted us in balancing the budget. So if you would take a moment to look at these that are on page 5, 6, 5 and 6, and see if you have any questions with regards to any of these cuts. Again, these are all cost center cuts, or reductions. I believe we have one. Let's see. We have a couple of increases. One is for $380,000. I should say net reductions. One is for $380,000. $7 textbooks for redesigned schools. There was a need to order some additional textbooks there. And then I believe the other increase was for $2,500, cost center $1119. There was some flyers that needed to be printed for wellness initiative for group health. And one other, one other increase to allow for T-shirts relating to the Word Millionaire initiative of the media center, the reading program. And then we did add 4 account clerks to help to assist with our high schools accounting. You may recall when we went over the audit report, we indicated we would come back with a game plan to try to address, at a minimum, the high schools' issues with regards to fundraisers and class fees. Our auditors had indicated that if we address high school, there was such a significant contributor to our finding that if that were removed, then there's a very good chance that the finding would be removed. So what we're proposing is 4 account clerks whose primary focus would be reconciliation of fundraisers, assisting the club sponsors who need training or help with the completion of those fundraisers, and that comes at a cost of $165,000. 4, we have right now, we hadn't finalized it, but basically each account clerk would have 2 schools, for the most part, 2 high schools, with exception of 1, and that one would have a rather large high school that has a lot more activity than the other schools. So that's sort of what we're looking at there. Not to mention any names.
Mr. Guidry.
Yes.
Does this take into consideration a percentage of the fundraising being put toward these positions, kind of the skin in the game we talked about?
What it does, this is 100% of the cost, anticipated cost. At one point in time, we had looked at, possibly the high schools could fund a percentage of these individuals, and the general fund would fund the rest. We opted to go with just a general fund funding the entire amount. After we met with the high schools, because Yeah, but a wide variety of situations. You have one high school that's just starting up, so to charge them that, that full amount, there's an issue of equity there, so on and so forth. And you were talking about $55,000. So we went ahead and put in the 100% and found the offsets to make that happen. So this is at 100%.
Any questions?
On the fundraising, I know that we have that our accountants have asked for a shorter duration between the time that you have the fundraiser and the time that you fill out all the necessary forms relative to the fundraiser. Some schools do it, every time there's a fundraiser. Some schools do it every month. I think some schools do it 2 or 3 times a year, and they just kind of make numbers kind of fit wherever they go. Can we shrink that time frame with these new people and make it more, more concise and more frequent rather than less frequent?
Well, the type of fundraiser sort of dictates how often that occurs. We have some fundraisers that are for a few days and then they're done. So that, in that scenario, that would turn around. The turnaround on that would be very quickly. We have others that might go for a month, some are quarterly, and some go throughout the whole year. So what we do with those that go throughout the whole year is, say, at a minimum, you have to reconcile it on a quarterly basis. In other words, zero it out. It's the same fundraiser, but you have to reconcile it at a minimum on a quarterly basis. So you have fundraisers that have different time periods, and those are pretty much the 3 groups. A week, less than a week, something closer to a month, and then you have some that are quarterly or some that span the whole year. But we will have them reconciling those that span a long time period during that time period. You're not going to wait until it's over. We're not going to wait a year to try to do the reconciliation. We're going to do it on an interim basis. Any other questions? So these are all the changes that were made since the last meeting on the 17th, and the net result of those changes is a projected net surplus of $960, which means this proposed budget reflects a balanced budget. Okay, so at this point, if there are no recommendations with regards to the proposed budget, we'll be back on the 15th with a request that the board approve our moving forward with the budget adoption process.
Mr. Santani?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board, so Mr. Guidry, I'm going to tell you what I'm trying to accomplish, and then you can correct me when I inevitably mess this up, okay? I move that the board approve the adjustment to current student-teacher ratios for regular ed, current student-teacher ratios for special ed, teacher ratios for pre-K, staffing ratios for assistant principals, appeals for assistant principals, staffing ratio for counselors, staffing ratio for custodians, staffing ratio for clerical assistants. Trying to let y'all hire tomorrow. Yes, Miss Dorothy, they were They were student-teacher ratios, regular ed, special ed, pre-K, staffing ratio for assistant principals, the appeals for assistant principals, the staffing ratio for counselors, the staffing ratio for custodians, the staffing ratio for clerical assistants, and that was it.
Question?
Mr. Guidry.
Yes, we also had world languages and ESL included as well. I don't know if Mr. Centennial would consider adding those.
Yeah, when he's done with his side conversation, we'll ask him. Gotta go. No.
No,
Mr. Centennial?
Yes.
Mr. Guidry, would you repeat that?
Well, we'll start from the top. Itinerant teachers, gifted and talented. NP Moss staffing. World languages emerging. ESL staffing. And pre-K staffing. I think that'll cover the other categories that would pretty much allow us to staff for the classrooms.
So I intentionally included the line items that would cover the reality of our schools today. Right. So the adjustment to the current student-teacher ratios, which would authorize spots for student counts in the classroom today. I intentionally left out the increase, both the increases and the NP Moss staffing decrease. We can certainly handle that if somebody wants to make a motion after this. I intentionally left it out, trying to give you guys what you need to let the principals make their plans for next year.
And the world language immersion, ESL staffing, and pre-K staffing, would you consider?
Well, those were the increases that I was just talking about, right?
Okay. Were they?
Those weren't adjustments to those were not reconciliations to the current ratios, right? Those are actual increases.
Well, those are our staffing needs as a result of looking at the
Oh, well, they were okay. They were
Yes.
labeled differently than the other ones.
Yes.
I apologize. Okay, so which ones are like that?
The itinerant teachers, staffing, gifted and talented. World language immersion staffing, ESL staffing, and pre-K staffing.
Okay, certainly. Please include those in my motion.
So we have a motion by Mr. Centennial, a second by Mr. Lanchelay. Mr. Centennial, just want to point out, I totally get your intent, your motion's intent. A couple of things just to point out. The recommended action is that the board provides recommendations with regards to adjustments. Not that your motion is out of order, however, with 3 absent board members, just keep that in mind for the next budget meeting before we move forward.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
Any comments or questions? I'm sorry.
I would say I hope if everybody here votes for it tonight, that you would vote for
It'll
it
be
again.
done.
Should it come up in the future?
Any comments from the public? Additional comments from board members? Let's call for the vote.
That's what I'm understanding. So. But he's still like approving it. 1, 2, 3.
So I'm just going to make a quick comment while they're correcting that. I'm going to vote against this tonight just because we do have 3 board members missing and we still have a couple of days left in the budget process. So I'm just keeping my options open for continued discussion. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm against the staffing ratios. I'm just voting. I think it's a little premature, at least from my view.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then skip over to itinerant. And, we didn't do anything more. And then world language, ESL, and pre-K. Okay.
Once the motion is updated, I'm going to read it out loud before you close the voting, Miss Dorothy. Once the motion is updated, I'm going to reread it out loud before you close the voting. Dr. Aguilar?
Members of the board, I just want to call your attention. My understanding of this motion, should it pass, is this doesn't really get us to the point where we can allow principals to make hiring decisions.
I think I would agree.
How so?
Any positions that a board would choose to cut on at the next budget meeting, any position above classroom teacher, those individuals would need to have guaranteed teaching positions. So it would be inappropriate for principals to fill vacancies and lock out opportunities for any employee cut, that their position is cut, to have a teaching position.
Let me reread the motion while you collect your thoughts. That the board approve the adjustment of the current student-teacher ratio for regular ed, pre-K, SPED, staffing ratio for assistant principal appeals, for assistant principals, staffing ratio counselors, staffing ratio for clerical assistants, staffing ratio for custodians, itinerant teaching, staff, gifted and talented, ESL, world language. Just a little. Yeah, that's, yeah. Mr. Satana, you had a few words?
I wanted to, Dr. Aguilar, I appreciate what you're saying, I do. We voted to allow Southside High School to hire several months ago. Were they able to fill their teaching positions before any potential positions were cut?
I'll let Ms. Suzanne answer that. You and I had a deep conversation about that.
I make no secret about my distaste for this
Right.
this displaced teacher policy.
Ms. Thibodeau?
It's only been displaced. We have they have taken 3 displaced teachers.
Now, I asked that question, and I knew the answer. I asked that question, though, to point out that it is completely within the authority of the administration here to hire teachers for Southside High School. Right?
Well, we could probably hire for some other positions too, but we're very loyal to our employees. So if we have someone that is in jeopardy of losing a position, we keep positions open.
I appreciate that.
And so that we can fill them with people that have been here. And so
No,
You are, I mean, we could hire some in other schools as well.
and I'm simply pointing out that this motion does give you the authority to hire teachers for these schools. But maybe the decision is a good one, maybe it's a bad one. I'm not gonna have that discussion right now. But if the superintendent tells you to hire teachers for Lafayette High School or Como High School or LG Alamo Middle School, then you have the authority to do it with this motion right here.
I think the superintendent pretty much said that that's not going to happen. But Mr. Lachele?
The thing that concerns me is there are teachers that are going to leave high schools to go to Southside. So what's going to happen is the minute the freeze is gone, these teachers are automatically going to Southside. Now our other high schools have to go out and hire to replace. Teachers are moving. If I'm not mistaken, I think there's 2 from Acadiana who have already pretty much agreed to go to Southside. So now that leaves 2 positions open at Acadiana. I got a principal sitting there waiting to fill a position, and every day we wait, the pool gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So what you're going to have is you're going to have one high school pool from existing teachers that are sitting in classrooms now, and then these schools got to go out and hire maybe new people, and they're being put behind the curve. And that, I mean, that doesn't sit too well with me. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying it's a bad thing one school is taken from another, but you've got one that's going to bring teachers in that'll be seated immediately, and then now you got schools that have to fill open positions.
So I think we just heard that all staffing has not been done at Southside, and there will also be teachers that leave other schools to go to Acadiana, Mr. Lachele, and that's the employee's choice to apply at those schools.
Oh no, I didn't
we
say it that
voted-
way, but what I'm telling you is I think the cards are pretty much filled of who's going where. You're going to have principals who are going to have to start from scratch. We're sitting here May 10th. May 10th, okay? Other parishes have hired and filled slots already. We're going to have to, in the future, do a better job
I agree.
at this, a much better job, because, in my opinion, this is unacceptable. We've got to staff our schools. We've got to go after the best. We can't do it if other parishes are beating us to the punch. And all we were trying to do today is give our principals and our schools the opportunity to go forward and hire who they need. We've got to wait till Tuesday. I guess we've got to wait till Tuesday. But I would make a recommendation that we do not go through this again next year, because every year is the same thing. I remember the first year we sat here, I said, we've got to do a better job at this, and nothing has gotten better. I would like for our last year for it to get a little better. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Any additional comments, Ms. Morris?
Just very briefly, I recall at the last budget season, we had actually discussed having a mid-year budget meeting to discuss exactly this issue, because it came up last year as well. But for whatever reason, it just never came to us mid-year to kind of start the conversation. So I'm not sure what happened.
Dr. Aguilar?
So just as a reminder, we presented to the board on April 23rd a balanced budget. We had been directed, Mr. Guidry and I, to hit a target of revenue for the budget. We presented to you guys on April 23rd a balanced budget. We could have very shortly after that meeting, we could have begun the process of staffing our schools. We've been working since April 23rd, and we have presented to you again tonight a balanced budget. We're prepared to let principals hire tomorrow morning. We just have to be sure that any and all cuts to personnel have been done by this board, and we will be ready to staff our schools. In my mind, really the only issue left unresolved is the school resource officer budget for the upcoming school year. There are lots of numbers from lots of entities, and we do have a couple of board members who are not here tonight, but we really should be moving forward with the budget. In all respects, we plan to try to bring this to the board in subsequent years, a budget, once we know exactly, you know, what our revenue is and what our expenses are. You may or may not have noticed that between April 23rd and today, we added about $1 million, $1 million plus dollars to the budget. That was money that we just learned that we had a responsibility to account for. It was $380,000 of textbooks and a budget control reconciliation, the final piece to that, which cost us another $700,000. About $1 million went into rebalancing the budget. I would like nothing more than for this board to say we're comfortable with the budget the superintendent and the staff have presented. In both cases, they've been balanced budgets.
You get my commitment, I'm fine.
All right, we got a motion on the floor. Do we have any other comments or questions related to the motion on the floor? Madam Secretary, call for the vote.
When we compared what we had on our report to what Caleb was using to count to do staffing, it was $1 million difference. So we finally got it reconciled. They needed $2 million more.
4 for, 2 against.
Motion carries. Next item. Are these the only motions for item 2.3? Mr. Guidry?
Yes, we had an approval by the board of quotes for annual screen and recoat of gym floors. I believe there was a typo which basically put us about $7,000 short on being able to complete the project. So this particular agenda item is requesting a revision that allows us to correct that typo and provide the funding that's needed to complete the recoding. Can you get to that one? This one here, 2.9. 2.9.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board amend the motion that was adopted on May 2nd, 2018 to authorize staff to award the low bid to Acadiana Clean Team for $20,054 for gymnasium screen and recoats in according with purchasing procedures and guidelines by striking out $20,054 and inserting $27,054.
Second.
Or any questions or comments from members of the audience? Members of the board? Madam Secretary will call for the vote.
Five for, none against.
The next item is 2.4 General Fund Cost Centers, proposed budget for 1100 series. That's it.
Mr. Angel, those have all been covered in Mr. Guidry's summary.
All right. Well, do we need to vote on them individually?
No.
Do we need in global? That's all the business we have at hand? Meeting adjourned.